Right, my previous tutorial I did a kind of an overview of high level showing how tiling textures can be made inside of 3ds Max. So I'm going to walk through a very simple version for that you can extrapolate to make your own more complex tiling textures. So here I'm going to go up and do customize unit setup, system unit setup, make sure I'm working 1 unit equals 1 centimeter. I'm in generic units. I'm now going to right click on my 3D settings, go to home grid and set it to grid spacing 100 and hit enter. And now over here where it says plane, I'm going to go ahead and under keyboard enter, I'm going to make a 400 by 400 grid. Alright, there we go. So this I'm going to call my low poly backing. This is a name selection set. So if I come up here, it says create selection sets. If I click, I can select, that's always going to select my low poly background. So I'm going to freeze that. I'm also going to come over here to create, and under shapes, I'm going to make a rectangle that is 400 by 400. I'm going to raise it up into the air. I'm going to make it a bright color, this light blue. And under display, I'm going to turn off show frozen and gray and freeze it. Right, so now, as I'm building, I'll be able to always see where my edges are. So let's go in here. We'll make a very simple object to begin with. So I'm going to do a very large set of bricks. And my grid is 400. So I'm going to make a box about this big. Now, I want to have it be a little bit more scientific than that. So I kind of got the general shape. So this needs to be 100 by 200 by 50. And this is going to be my basic brick. Now I want to take that brick and I want to set it so it's actually sitting on the grid well. So I'm going to set this to negative 100 and 150. So there's my basic brick just sitting there. I'm going to call him brick. And now from there, I want to start laying out the rest of my brick. And so really, because I am doing a tiling texture, why don't we move him over so he sits right here on the edge. So this would be negative 200. I'm going to use tools, array. If I turn on preview, I can use my array to set this to how wide was my brick, why it was 200. And so I can make 200 bricks. Or I can make 3 bricks that are spaced out by 200 units, make them all instances and say OK. I can do the same thing here where I grab these, do tools, array, and go ahead and move these down. And I want to reset all parameters, hit preview, and I want to offset these by the height, which was 100, but I need to take these down negative 100. And I don't need 10. I'm going to need less than that. There we go. This gives us a good basic set. Alright, so I can take my bricks here. I'm going to go ahead and do shaded and show edged faces. All right. So it's a little bit tricky to see our bricks right now because they are all perfectly square. So just to make it a little bit easier, I'm going to put an edit poly on here in an edge mode. I'm just going to region select that one brick and open chamfer. I'm going to chamfer it 2 units. I'm going to round it out a little bit too. And then we'll just leave it at that. So I'll close that off. So now we can see our different brick pieces here. See a little bit more detail. Okay, so what do we want to do? We don't want a perfect brick like this. We also want to make sure that we got something at the top and the bottom. So we're going to turn on our absolute transforms and move this up 100 units. Perfect. Okay, so this brick row sits here. We're going to need to take every other one and offset them by 200, by 100 units. Yep, so now we get that nice brick pattern happening because everything's offset. Now one thing you notice that we're not going to have anything here, so what's going to happen is when we go to bake our texture out, there's not going to look correct because there's not a brick over on the side to capture that little ambient occlusion when we bake here. So let's grab these bricks and we're going to clone them. So clone as instances, and we're going to move those back negative 400 down here in our absolute type bin, and we just need to move them back 200 more. There we go. So now you see this brick here is represented down underneath it, this one underneath as well. And so at this point we have what represents a very basic tiling brick set. And so we could take this and bake it out in Substance Painter and throw a material on it. Now, one thing that is going to make it a little bit more useful is if we can mask it out, because you don't want to put a cement or any kind of texture on it that's just going to repeat to the ones underneath it. And so we're going to create a mask for it. So let's open the material editor. And now inside our material editor, we're going to need to make a couple different materials. So I'm going to bring in a material. And so this brick, I'm going to move to select and not select and move. That way I won't accidentally move my bricks. You want to find the bricks where they actually tile. So this brick tiles over here, and he also tiles underneath to the bottom and over to the side. I also take this and assign that material over. Now, I can keep doing this process, going through and finding those bricks that happen to tile like that. So if I just clone this down and assign it, I do want to go in and change the color. And so it helps to change the value a little bit as well as the color. And so we'll just keep going through and we'll make a series of tiling of textures like this. Get variety going. And it's just taking our textures, assigning them, adjusting their values. Now this one, it tiles up here to the top, so we'll want to do that as well. And we just keep going through this process, just adjusting the value and the hue. You don't want to have them too close together. You do want to have a nice bit of variety in them. If your colors are too close together, you may have a difficult time going through and selecting them when you're doing select by color. Alright, so we're almost there. It looks like we only need 2 more. And the more complicated your tiling texture pattern, the more you may want to get more variety in there. Now this is just one way to get your mask set up and get a little bit more variety in your material. And then we have this guy, this last one. So we'll do one more for the lone wolf here. So we get a nice variety happening. Change our color, so we'll grab another value here and shift it over to, there we go. Okay, so now our textures, we've defined our different tiling elements. So one thing that'll also be nice to have is if we grab a plane and we just put a plane that sits behind. That way there won't be nothing will kind of show up behind here as far as like, we want to make sure there's always something there, and let's go ahead and we're just going to give this guy material. And so you could think of this kind of as the grout sitting inside there. So give that a texture. Shift that over. Okay, there we go. All right, so we can take all of our high poly elements and we can actually come over here and say high poly meshes. And now we can export those out. So it's going to be the same process of exporting them. So I'm going to take my selected meshes. I'm going to come over here, File, Export Selected. And I'm going to call this Wall High Poly and save that. I want to make sure I have smoothing groups turned on and say OK. The following object's geometry type, converting into data much. That's okay. This is fine. I'm going to hide that. And then I'm going to unfreeze all, and I want to take my plane. I don't need to worry about UVs for the plane because it already has generated mapping coordinates. So I'll do the same thing and export him out. And that'll be wall low poly. All right, so the next step is for me to open this up in Substance Painter. And so I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to pause while I load up that program. All right, so here I am inside of Substance Painter. I've already gone through and I've selected my wall low poly. In this case, I'm going to work inside of Unreal Engine 4, but you could change to whatever template works for you. I'm going to click OK. So we could use our middle mouse button to Alt and the middle mouse button to pan this over. And if we hold Alt and click out in negative space, we can orbit around to see our plane here, our low poly plane. So I'm going to come over. I have my texture set settings. I've floated that over so it's in its own location. I'm going to come to Bake Mesh Maps. I'm going to click Bake Mesh Maps. I'll leave it at 2048. I'm going to click High Definition. I want to select my wall High Poly. And I want to go to ID. I want to make sure I'm baking out my material color. And I'll go back up to Common. And let's hit Bake Default. And so that's going to go ahead and bake our textures. Now, we have there's quite a difference in height. And so it looks like already we can see that we're going to need to adjust the distance there. So we're going to go to Bake Mesh Maps, and we'll just increase the max front distance to the maximum of 1, and then we'll hit Bake. And this should go through and actually bake out. And there you go. There's our, we've defined kind of those edges. Now, had you taken those blocks into a program like ZBrush and sculpted on them or made adjustments to them, it would definitely look better. This is, as I said, just a very basic way to set this up. So, all right, at this point, I have my textures are baked out, and so I can go ahead and I'm going to delete this and make a new layer. And inside there, I'm just going to throw in something like this concrete clean. And what I'm going to do is make sure that's sitting in that folder, and I'm going to say add mask with color selection and pick a color, this green. All right, so now I kind of have that green there. And now in another layer, actually I'm going to delete that. I'm going to select this folder, and I'm going to say duplicate layer, and I'm going to clear the mask and say mask with color selection. I'm going to pick a different color. And what I want to do here is with this concrete, I just want to do a little bit of an offset on it so that the texture isn't exactly the same going around. Okay. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to go through and we're going to offset them for each one of those different colors. And it may seem tedious, but this is how you end up getting more interesting looking material. This is how you go through and actually get it so that this sort of patterning doesn't repeat, right? You can see here, this patterning goes right across the top there. And what we want to do is we want to offset that. So we're going to take this, offset it a little bit more. Right? What you would have to look out for is if you were doing a tiling, right? You want to make sure you're not adjusting the scale, because right now it will tile this section here. It'll tile over to the side, right? And so you want to make sure that you're not breaking it that way. All right, let's duplicate this folder. All right, same thing, duplicate layer, clear the mask, mask with color selection, and pick a color, and go into the concrete clean, and we're just going to offset it more. All right. And so I'm going to pause this and go through and knock out the rest of these just to kind of, for expedience, to speed things up. You know, actually I opted to not do that. I'm going to leave it as is, and I'm going to leave it on here for you to watch, because you can see, I think it's important that you see that you do have to go through this process to make this more original. You know, try and break it up, get some variety happening inside of here. And we only have 3 more to do. So go through, we clear the mask, we mask with color selection and pick those remaining colors. Grab the concrete. Now this concrete kind of has a specific look happening on it. Right? And if you had a more complicated material sitting inside here, you could definitely, this may be more important. You may not notice it as much with this one, but depending on what material you pick, you may find that it's going to be even more important to go through and do this process of doing the offset and moving elements around inside there. You may not have to move them too much in order to get that variety. And we'll do one more duplicate layer, clear the mask, mask with color selection. We pick that remaining color, there he is, and then we'll grab the concrete and we'll just shift him over. There we go. So now we have our basic mask set up. We could export this out if we wanted to. We could. Let's go ahead. I'm going to make a new folder, and inside there I'm going to do a new fill layer. And what I'm going to use is base color. I'm going to pick my texture. Actually, I can come over here to textures. I believe I could just drag this in here to base color, and so I've kind of dropped this in. So let's put this inside here. I'm going to set this to, you see there's lots of blend options. I mean, I could set it to saturation. That's really not what I want though. What I want to do is go to value, and when I set it to value, you see the value starts to come through, and all those different, by adjusting that value a little bit, I get a little bit of variety in here. Now right now what's happening, this fill layer is affecting all of these different maps. It's affecting the normal, which we don't want it to affect the normal. We don't want it to affect the metal, the roughness, or the height. The only thing we want this to affect is just the color. And so it should be going through and affecting just the value, but it is coming through a lot more intense. And so let's set both of them to value. And it did not make a difference. So we can adjust, so it's just a little bit subtle here. Kind of a subtle effect of having those different variety. There we go. Alright, so now we have a basic tiling block. We could go ahead and we could save our project and export it out. The last thing to do would be to test it in Mac. So I'm going to export this. So I'll go to File, Export Textures. I'll go ahead and specify the location where I want it. Select the folder. And set down Real Engine 4 and I hit Export. That's going to export out my textures. And then what I'll do is I'm going to load these up inside of 3ds Max to test them out. So let's, real quick, we'll take a look at them in the folder. Alright, so here in the folder, the way the texture is named, it's the name of the mesh, followed by the material, and then the type. So that's really long. It doesn't need to be that. So I'm just going to change it to wall BC. And then I'm going to rename the other maps as well. Wall underscore N, wall underscore AORM, which is short for ambient occlusion, roughness, and metallic. Alright, so let's open up 3ds Max now. And I'm going to take this plane and clone it over to the side as a copy. I'm going to change the number of segments to 0. And I'm going to open up my material. Alright, my material, I'm going to bring over a standard material and assign it to this plane. And I'm going to bring in my base color and assign that as the diffuse. I'm going to say show realistic material viewport, and then close my material editor. And now I could kind of see the texture on there. You can see the different values. If I plug in the normal, I'd be able to see it better. So if you're showing you how to do that, so I'll open up the material editor again. All right, so I'm just going to bring in my normal, and a normal map is not a native function inside of 3ds Max. You have to use this thing called a normal bump. You plug that into the bump, and the normal map gets plugged into where it says normal here. So I close this now. There you go. You can kind of see the little edges in here. If you wanted to come over to create, we're not even going to deal with that. The base lighting is going to show it just fine. All right. I'm going to select my mesh. I'm going to use a modifier called UVW Xform that allows me to easily adjust tiling. So if I tell this to tile 3 times, we can see how our texture looks. So let's maximize this.